About infancy and childhood, yeah, and then also that initial embryo formation is ossification is happening. Injury, so like a fracture, absolutely. Ossification occurs during healing of a fracture, and then one more.
Remodeling.
Exactly, remodeling. So our bones are continually remodeling throughout our lives, and that is, and ossification is occurring. So a few factors that influence bone development. Diet. So what's the most important thing in our diet for bone development? Calcium. Where do we get our calcium? Milk. Yeah, dairy products, cheese, yogurt. So I actually I read a study that was done that looked at children between the ages of 3 and 10, and they compared children that were milk avoiders versus children who like to drink milk. And what they found is that the children who were milk avoiders were generally shorter, they had smaller skeletons, and they had a lower total body bone mineral content. And 24% of those children that I looked at that were milk avoiders had previously broken a bone. So I thought that was pretty significant. So physical activity. So what do you guys think is the most important type of physical activity for children to be doing? Running, weight bearing, exactly. Why? Why do you think weight bearing is? Yeah, so the way that our bones respond to stress is by strengthening and growing more bone. So that's why weight bearing activities are the best. So what other activities do you guys think are good for our weight bearing? Jumping, dancing. Good. So this is why children with chronic illnesses or children that are immobile, they're not having good bone development because they're unable to get outside and run and play and fall and all those good things that are helping building our bones up. Going back to diet real quick, there's one other thing I want to talk about that's important in your diet. Vitamin D. So where do we get vitamin D in our diet? Yeah, in our diet. Hearing lots of things. So vitamin D, you actually don't really find it in your diet very often. I mean, there are foods that have fortified, like there's vitamin D milk, and there's cereals that are fortified with vitamin D. Fish is really kind of one of the only natural sources of vitamin D, but you're right, we get it from the sun. So what our skin does is it produces vitamin D when it's exposed to UV rays. So knowing that, so what do you guys think? Who would be at more risk for vitamin D deficiency? Yeah, so people that live really far away from the equator that don't have a lot of sunlight, those people are definitely at risk for vitamin D deficiency and are more at risk for fractures. Who else? Am I talking really loud? I just realized. Okay, sorry. Okay, so who else?
People that work indoors or in mines.
Yeah, so people that aren't going outside very often. The one that I was thinking of was people that have darker skin. So when you have darker skin, you have more pigmentation, and it protects you from those UV rays. So those people still are producing vitamin D, but not as much as a fairer skin person would be. So darker skin people are actually at more risk for developing or for getting fractures. So, okay, so you're taking care of a school-age boy in a pediatric clinic. The mother of the boy asks you what activities are best for promoting healthy bone development in her son. Which of the following would not be a correct response by the nurse? So we talked about this a little bit. Swimming and cycling, exactly. So all those other ones that are mentioned have weight bearing, they have impact involved, whereas swimming and cycling, you are working against gravity, but you don't have that impact that's good for bone development. So it's good for cardiovascular, good for muscle development, but not so much bone. So this is just a good slide to know. It just kind of outlines how much calcium children need depending on their age. In terms of milk. Yes?
So when we study osteoporosis, they say the highest risk person is an elderly, kind of Scandinavian woman, fair skin. So I'm just curious how that relates to, because I was under the impression that fair-skinned people were at higher risk of more frail bones. And you're saying the opposite. You're saying that darker-skinned
Yeah. Well, the highest risk for people with osteoporosis is people that don't get that bone development, that proper bone development as children. They say that osteoporosis is actually a pediatric disorder with geriatric consequences. So the biggest risk factor is people who don't, as a child, get that bone development. So I don't. But as far as the fair skin thing, I'm not sure. Maddie, do you have anything to add on that? 'Cause I wouldn't have said that. I don't know if that's a different source. Yeah, I haven't heard that either.
So I won't test you.
Not going to be tested. Okay, some fractures in children. It's the resistance of bone against stress is overcome by the stress force. So causes of this can be traumatic injury, and that can be accidental or non-accidental. So common sources of traumatic injury in children include, what do you guys think, like school-age children? Falls, bike accidents, sports, and car accidents. Okay? So fractures in infancy are often the result of birth trauma. But other than motor vehicle accidents, fractures in young children are pretty uncommon just by accidents because they're not mobile, they're not ambulatory, so they're less likely. And about 25% of all children with 25% of children that present to the ER with a fracture are as the result of abuse. So nurses kind of need to be really clued in to know the signs of abuse. And then congenital conditions can be a factor as well. Osteogenesis imperfecta, it's a bone defect of bone resorption resulting in structurally weak bone. We're going to talk about this more in depth later on in the lecture. So a few characteristics of fractures in children. They have growth plates that are located near the ends of the long bones, near the joints, and those serve to absorb shock and protect the joint from injury. Children's bones are more pliable because that complete calcification has not occurred yet. Their bones are softer than adults, and they are more prone to the green stick type fractures, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. And then children's bones heal more rapid than adults. Why do you guys think that would be? What?
Do they have more growth hormone?
More
As they're
growth
growing?
hormone, possibly.
So it's just everything's.
So children's bones, so everyone's bones are covered with what? Periosteum. Okay, it's a fibrous membrane. Children's periosteum is a lot more dense and more thick and more vascular than adults, so they get more oxygen and nutrients to their bones. So they heal a lot quicker. So here's a good picture of the growth plates where they're located. You can see they're near the ends of the long bones, near the joints. They're also known as epiphyseal plates. I usually can't say that right. Did I say it wrong? Epiphyseal. Epiphyseal. Yeah, I would say it wrong. So I call them growth plates. So typically these are areas of developing cartilage tissue near the ends of the long bones. They typically close at about age 18 in females and 21 in males. So that's when growth stops. So if there was a fracture over a growth plate, what do you guys think would be the consequence as far as healing? Anyone? Yeah, so it can stop growing. So this is because the cartilage, when there's a fracture across the growth plate, it actually accelerates the closure of that growth plate. And so there can be uneven limbs. One limb will grow faster than the other one. So that can be a big problem. So children who have fractures that are across growth plates, a lot of times will need surgical intervention to prevent that growth plate from closing. And then they'll need to be watched closely years after the fracture to make sure that both sides are growing evenly. So here's just a little bit closer picture of, like, there's a green stick fracture at the front, at the top there. So it breaks on one side, but is just maybe bent a little on the other side. And then there's an example of a fracture across the growth plate. And about 15 to 30% of all childhood fractures are growth plate fractures.
What was the percentage?
15 to 30%. Okay, so we're going to talk about some different types of fractures now. So we mentioned green stick fractures. So this is by far the most common type of fracture in adolescence. So this is where one side of the bone is broken, the other it maybe just bends but doesn't completely break. So anyone have any ideas of why this would be a common type of fracture in adolescence? Yeah, so their bones are still kind of pliable, more soft. So they actually have more organic component to their bone than inorganic. So organic component would be like collagen, and that's what helps the bone to stretch but not break. And adult bones have more inorganic, so more calcified bone that breaks easier. So that's why they're more prone to that kind of fracture. Transverse fracture. So this is a complete break that runs perpendicular to the bone, mostly caused by a sharp direct blow to the bone, and it's usually displaced. So most often this type of fracture will need surgery to bring the bone ends back to be realigned, and then it can be casted. And then simple fractures are fractures that are complete but are not displaced and usually can just be treated with a cast. So oblique fracture, so this is caused by a slanted blow to the bone. And this kind of break can occur throughout the body, but it's most often found in long bones of the arm and leg. So usually oblique fractures are non-displaced. They, again, can just be treated with a cast. Comminuted fracture, so this is when there's a presence of 3 or more bone fragments. So this is associated with crushing injuries. And this is less common in pediatric